So welcome back to another session of Just Me. Today we're joined by William Buist. Am I saying that right, William?
Not quite. Buist.
Buist. So William Buist.
Yeah, that's it.
William Buist is a mutual friend of a lady called Chantal Cook, and I'm going to hand over to you, William. So, who are you and what do you do, please?
Thanks, Sid. Yeah, well, so as we said, my name's William Buist. I work these days with business owners, helping them to become masters of their art, the best that they can be at what they do. And I'm sure we'll talk about my history, my journey. So we'll come back to that. But that's what I do today, and it's a great deal of fun.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, so give us a sort of a brief history of how you arrived today. So, what was early childhood like, and what was your sort of path along the way?
Sure. So I was born of Scottish parents in Manchester. Um, over 60 years ago. It seems like it's yesterday, really. Life flies by, and there's so much that's been done in that time too. It's been a great journey. I followed in their footsteps. I went to St Andrews University where they met, and from there I went into the insurance industry and did a whole career in underwriting and risk management. I was a kind of analyst to begin with, loved playing with numbers, and gradually, learned my trade and went through, the transitions that we all go through from knowing nothing about what we do to, getting really good and at the practitioner side of it, just doing what we do and doing it really well, building up expertise, and in amongst that, I started to learn how to run projects and put project teams together. And when I started doing that, I realized there was something really very special about bringing teams of people together. And that's kind of what led me to leave the insurance industry and start working for myself to help my clients now, the businesses that I work with now, to be the best they could be by gathering the right people around them that can support the business, whether that's employed or in the form of suppliers or associates, however they works best for them. But that collaboration and that spirit that comes from having a great team around you is really something that I've found a great deal of enjoyment in helping people to do.
That's fantastic because it's really important, isn't it, having the right people kind of around you and that fuel you along the way. So, what have been your main lessons that you've learned along the way then?
I think the biggest lesson is that it's really not to take yourself too seriously. That in all the things that we do, and in our educate, even as a young man at school and then at university, there was this kind of sense of that education was important, and gathering the knowledge that you needed to be able to do whatever you choose to do um, was really important, and it is. But that when you've got it, that doesn't make you something different or something special. You've still got to apply it, and you've got to learn the skills, and through experience, make mistakes, screw it up from time to time. And I think part of the learning for me was that, I can screw things up pretty well. I should have a degree in that, really. I've done enough mistakes over the years. And at the beginning, it seems sometimes like, you make a big mistake and it's like, oh, the world's coming to an end. People are going to think I'm stupid, or people are going to see me for the fraud that I think I am sometimes, that imposter syndrome thing.
Mm,
Um, and in reality, the biggest single thing to do when you make a mistake is to stick your hand up and say, that didn't go too well, did it? Never mind. Where do we go from here? And, not worrying too much about what you did wrong, but worrying a lot about what you can learn from having done it wrong and how you can make sure that it doesn't happen again. And I think, that's where I kind of see the difference between somebody who's a novice and is just thinking about learning a trade or something to do, and the expert and the master at what they do, who kind of knows that that's part of doing something. If you're not making mistakes, you're not really doing anything. um, so
that's brilliant.
that to me was the biggest learning along the way.
I really like that. I mean, I love the way that you say that you can kind of screw things up, pretty well. And I think, we all can as human beings. But it's interesting when you look at kind of profiles of people who are successful. And I don't mean successful in terms of money, but in terms of kind of happiness and kind of contentedness. They don't live in their mistakes, do they? And I think for a lot of people, and I've certainly spent a lot of my time living the victim, but they don't, do they? They kind of just go, oh, all right then. So, whoops, made a mistake there, screwed up. Okay, so how do I fix that, or how do I learn from that? And that's hugely important, isn't it?
It is, and I think when you look around in any walk of life at the moment, you can always see people who are really expert at covering up.
Brilliant.
They go out of their way for it to be somebody else's fault when things have gone wrong, and they it's not authentic, because it's just not real, is it? And I think looking back over, say, over the years of the things that I've learned, I know that there was a time when I too, kind of felt that, oh, how can I explain that thing away, rather than just going,
Mm,
sorry, boss, got this wrong.
mm,
And I think you know the maturity that comes with the recognition of, people will still be angry, they'll still be upset if you've made a big cock up and cost your company a load of money, or um, you know cut across somebody's values, or those things. They're still going to be upset, but they're also going to respect the fact that you owned up to it.
mm,
And I think that's the first step to putting things right. And to learning, again, learning what's the better way to do it.
mm.
Um,
I mean, it's interesting because Brené Brown sort of talks about it, the kind of power of vulnerability, and also this thing about shame. And I don't know about that word shame. I mean, I don't know that, whether it is a feeling that I have when I've kind of messed up. But there is something, isn't it, when we do mess up, or we don't feel that we can be held accountable for stuff. But why is that? Why is that as human beings we don't? I mean, and you mentioned, people at the moment not kind of stepping up or owning up to stuff, and that's kind of political leaders, isn't it, around the world, and kind of leaders of industry. But what is that? Is it shame? Do you think?
I mean, I think shame's a good label, although I think any of these emotional labels, people will understand
Hmm.
something slightly different when you use the word. If you say angry or shamed or guilt or regret, we all have our own understanding of what each of those words means. So I think we have to be careful in using them. That what the person we're saying it to understands is the same as what we meant. So, for
Mm,
some people, shame is a completely overwhelming emotion, and for others, it's a transitory moment. Um, and I think that kind of plays into how you treat exactly what we've just been talking about. How do you treat how you handle mistakes? Because if
mm,
you see shame as something that is overwhelming, I think that's what stops you wanting to stick your hand up. Um,
mm,
and but if it's the kind of, oh, let me put my head in my hands for a couple of minutes and think, I should have really done better than that. I'm over that now. It's a moment of shame, but it's not something that's going to constrain you for a long time. So that kind of makes sense.
like that thinking. So what and who has helped you kind of along the way, in this wonderful journey?
Well, there's one man that has always stuck in my memory, and he was my first boss, the man who hired me actually when I left university, and uh, he was a chap called Bill, and I can remember back in the days. This is sort of, when would it have been? 1979, 1980, something like that. And I can remember going into his office, which was a fog of pipe smoke because he smoked a pipe. You just wouldn't see that today. But uh, he did something that I think an awful lot of people with new employees don't do. He listened to me,
Wow.
um, and he listened to the things that I was talking about in terms of what I wanted to achieve, and nudged me in the right direction. He became, over the years. I mean, I worked with him directly for about 7 years, but he remained a mentor over many years beyond that. Um, and um, you know, the, that conversation that we had right at the beginning of the journey, where he shared the importance of learning, the joy of learning, but also the importance of giving,
Wow.
and sharing what you know with others, even when you think they know more than you do. It's one of the things he'd learnt in his life, was that there are little nuggets of information that somebody may have picked up last week about a topic you've worked on your whole life that for
Mm,
whatever reason you've missed. So,
mm.
never think that something you know is too trivial or too unimportant not to share it.
Oh, lovely.
And I thought that's been great advice that has helped me all my life as well.
That's really lovely. And is that something? I mean, I know that you mentor and you coach, to a very high level in terms of business and personally. So is that something that you that you find easy to do? Because it's not easy, is it? I mean, to find somebody who truly listens. And Nancy Klein, in her wonderful books, talks about it in terms of time to think or whatever, and creating those listening environments. But that's hard, isn't it? There aren't many people who truly listen.
It's really rare, and it's
Mm,
such a shame. One of the joys that I have is having the honor of being able to really listen to what other people have to say. And I think that, Nancy Klein talks about um, creating a generative environment, and I think that's a really important part of it, is that the
mm,
quality of how somebody listens to you can generate attention, that generate the environment in which they can really think broadly. And one of the
mm,
things that happens when you are really listened to, and it's not just about not interrupting, although that's a key part of it. It it's about listening with more than your ears.
mm,
It's about listening with your eyes, and listening with the sense of togetherness, and listening with noticing the the discomfort that people have as they think about things. And sometimes that's all done without any words at all.
mm,
We can see when people are not comfortable with the topic that they're thinking about. Um, I spent some time with somebody a couple of weeks ago who's got some really quite deep personal challenges in their life from a health and well-being point of view, with other members of their family that are really emotional for them.
mm.
And I think we were we were sat together for probably 2 or 3 hours, but there was a period in the middle of that. It was probably 10 minutes, maybe quarter of an hour, when all I did was listen, and all they did was not say anything.
Wow.
Um, and it was, it's getting me emotionally now thinking back to it. There's a deep connection in really listening between people, and we don't do it at our peril, frankly.
Mm. And why do you think that is? Do you think it's because? I mean, I sometimes think is it because we've just evolved all this wonderful technology that stops us getting to the heart of that communication, which is, as you say, actively listening or whatever, or is it that life has become too fast paced, or our focus is on different things?
I think it's a bit of all of that, and I think it's also a bit of um, evil in an evolutionary sense. We're also very competitive as a species.
Mm, mm,
We're competing with our environment in order to feed ourselves, and to make sure we have the resources that we need. And we've become this Homo sapiens species, thinking man. Well, I'm not sure that we do enough thinking, and it's interesting that we are called Homo sapiens, and yet we don't have the time to think. Um, and that's why it's such a delight when you're given the time to really think, and how that can evolve you as an individual as well as evolve the species. And I think we are too quick. We're pressing for results all the time. Business for so many people is about growth and being bigger this year than last year, and bigger next year than we are at the moment. And bigger can mean all sorts of things. I talk about building better business, not building bigger business. Better can mean bigger in some circumstances. Of course, it can. but really thinking hard about what would a better business be for the people involved in it. What would be a nicer environment to work in, a fairer place to be? What sort of income should people be taking from that business for the effort they're putting in and the knowledge they bring? And thinking about that from the point of view of all aspects rather than just the metrics that we lay across it to say this business is doing better because it paid its shareholders a bigger dividend. It's kind of, can we get away from the trivialities and start thinking about what people are as people? Maybe.
That's so powerful, isn't it? And I love that sentiment. Building better business. I mean, you mentioned a story the last time we spoke about a man who builds. Tell the story about the chap who builds schools,
Oh,
please.
indeed, yeah, yeah. So this was a client of mine who they run a training company, and they train corporate people all over the world with all sorts of things you would expect a training company to teach people: leadership, time management, those kinds of topics. But they set up a foundation and they put a proportion of profits or revenue, I can't remember which, into the foundation every year. And the foundation has been doing a couple of things, but one of them, really struck me. It was as a fantastic project. They build floating classrooms in Bangladesh, so that the children in Bangladesh can continue to be educated in the monsoon season when their traditional classrooms are flooded. Um, and that, the reason this really appeals to me is because it's at one level, it's a really simple idea, make the classroom float. Great. But it's the impact that has. That here's a generation of children who now get a full education, who can take the knowledge that they learn in those classrooms and apply it to make not just their lives better, but the lives of their children and their children's children better. This changes futures forever. Not It's not the kind of, well, we've got a problem because there's a flood and we need to fix it and help people get over the flood, and then when we go away again and we come back next year when things flood again. This is changing lives for generations to come, and they've been able to take people out from the business to Bangladesh to help nail planks into the boats and build the boats, and that's built a really strong connection between the team in the UK and the trainers all over the world, and this challenge that they're helping to resolve. And I think that's fantastic. I just think
That's amazing.
we need to be thinking more about how we can aggregate the good that businesses do and the resources that businesses have to be able to think like that and to do more of that. And I think they're one company and they have one contribution of their people and the money that they can provide to do it. But imagine if that was 1,000 companies or
More.
10,000 companies or 100,000 companies acting together, and how much good could that do with a sliver of the money that they're making? It doesn't need to impoverish anybody, but it can enrich us all.
Wonderful. Wouldn't it be wonderful that I always often think about this, and I've worked with many PLCs, but for instance, supermarkets. I always think that all the money they generate is fantastic, obviously for shareholders or whatever. But wouldn't it be great if 40% of all profit has to stay in the local area, or if that 20% of their revenue has to go on helping people who are more needy, like the training company that you mentioned. Wouldn't we build a better world by doing that? Yes, I love that. I love that story because it's so simple and it's so powerful, and as you say, it's a very simple solution that enables people to continue getting education. It's amazing.
Mm.
So what do you do if you kind of, I don't know, when things get tough? What keeps you going?
I I always remember it's a Winston Churchill quote. He had so many great ones, but one of his that I really love is, if you're going through hell, keep going. Um, and I think, to me, of course, we're going to have times when things are a little bit tougher than we'd like them to be, maybe a lot tougher than we'd like them to be. Um, and all sorts of things can happen. I've got a friend who's um, very sadly is suffering from a terminal cancer, and he it wasn't caught early enough, and it's metastasized. And I sent him a message the other day, and it's really the measure of him as a man, really. I said to him, "How are things?" And well, he said, "I'm in great spirits, but my body is failing me." And I just think that's the kind of attitude that gets you through tough times. And he knows there's an inevitable end that's not very far away. He doesn't know exactly when, but he knows it's not far away. He'll see this Christmas. He probably won't see next. And I think it's interesting how people react in that kind of circumstance. And some will kind of give up, and his view is this is just another tough challenge. And while I've got the opportunity to do great things for me and the people that I love, I'm going to keep doing them. And I think that to me is the way you get through tough times. It's just do the best you can because it's all you've got.
That's such a lovely mantra, isn't it? It's really, really nice. So what would you pass? I mean, if you could meet a kind of a very young William, if you could go back 50 whatever years, what advice would you give your younger self?
I think the problem with doing that is if I went back to give myself advice, it would take me all of the 50 years to give myself all of the advice that I'd need to give myself.
Right.
Um, and I think that's probably, nuts, boils down to the nuts of that is to just be more observant and look at what is around you, enjoy, revel in what is around you. There are opportunities everywhere if only you can open your eyes to see them. Opportunities to help other people, opportunities to do business in ways you hadn't thought of. You look at COVID came along. Our world was turned upside down in February, March this year. We're recording this. It's November. It's early December, and we're not quite a year in, and yet the world is a very very different place today um, than it was just 8 months ago, and I think probably will have changed forever. I think don't think anybody doubts that now. Um, so if we had been observant on some of the things that we could have done, we could have done some of these things years ago. We needed a
Mm,
trigger to push us over into doing more on video conferencing and thinking about how we can work from home and how that changes the way that we live our lives. And I think we questioned everything back in March, the way that we do everything, and we haven't really done that as a society for years. So go back to your younger self and say, just challenge everything you're doing. Is there a better way to do this? And don't be frightened of trying it, because we come back to that. There may be a lot of mistakes in that learning, but so what? Because it's learning. Um, so yeah, I think just be observant, but just look at what's possible and imagine that it's done and make it happen.
It's interesting, isn't it, how the world it has and is coping with COVID and how it's really dumped us on our bums, isn't it? Because, we are creatures of habit, and as soon as all the things that we used to do are taken away, it just becomes incredibly uncomfortable. But actually, if we were more adaptive and, as you say, we looked around and questioned things and were more observant, this would just be another thing that we would need to kind of get through. And as you say, we most probably would have picked it up years ago, or most probably wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think it wouldn't have happened. I think that's true, and I think and I don't want to equally well sort of give the impression that everything's okay
Mm,
for everybody, because it's not. There are a lot of people, a lot of businesses that have, and you look on the high street, we're hearing on the news every day about the big
mm,
chains, the Debenhams and the Top Shops and whatever, that are not making it through this transition. And that's thousands of people whose livelihoods are affected very deeply. And I don't for a moment want to take away, this is stuff that's beyond their control as well. It's not their fault that they no longer have a job. It's the circumstances. But even to those people is, be observant. The worst thing you can do is to bury your head and hide away because things feel difficult. Is the other side of this. Those shops supported people by selling them clothes. We still need clothes. Those shops may have gone. That function has not. So
yeah.
times change again, as they will, the opportunities will resurface for those people to come back and find better work than they had before with different companies than they had before. And I know it's tough. I just, encourage to go back to Churchill. If you're going through hell right now, keep going.
Mm,
Keep your eyes open, keep looking, keep working on how do I make myself better? How do I make myself more employable when the time comes back? How do I do something now that can help others, that will allow them to help me later? All of those things can help make this a bit easier. It's not been easy for a lot of people, and we should never forget that.
mm. That's good. I mean, it's actually that's answered the next question, which I was going to say, what advice would you give to others, really? And it is around that, isn't it? It's kind of, as you say, keep going. Um, you know, change will change, and things will always change. But the way that it's interesting, isn't it? The bad stuff happens, but it's the way that we, I suppose, respond to that bad stuff. It denotes and dictates the quality of life that we have for us and for others, really, doesn't
Mm.
it?
Yeah, very much so. And I think it's, you know, I kind of chuckling because I think there's a there's a kind of scale here. We learn through life, not just knowledge, although that's really important. And I think when if we take on a new challenge, a few years ago, I decided to really build up my skill as a digital photographer as a hobby.
Mm,
Um, got nothing really to do with what I do in business, although there are some connections and parallels. And I bought a digital camera and I sort of took it out of the box, and there's all these controls on it, and you think, I don't even understand what the letters mean, let alone what they do. Um, and at that point, you're an explorer. You're just trying things out. You have no knowledge at all,
mm,
and what you're on is a quest for knowledge. You want to understand and get to know the facts and how this thing works and so on. And when you get that knowledge, you do become, you can start taking some photographs, and some of them are good, and most of them are not, and you're a real novice in it. And at that point, you're on a quest for skill,
mm,
and that the novice transitions into a practitioner. There's somebody who can do the thing, can take photographs reasonably well, and you get more good photographs than bad ones, and all of those things, and then you kind of on a quest then for experience and to build up expertise. And it's no surprise to me that there's a sort of similarity to the words experience and expertise.
mm,
Um, they kind of sit together. But there's a bit beyond that, and I think for very few people who become real experts in their field, and this is where the parallels to business come in, that to get to the top of get their game, to be real masters of their art, and that mastery phase is all about the acquisition of wisdom.
mm,
And wisdom is to me is more than knowledge or skill and experience. It's about applying all of those things in the context of the more general topic. So, people learn, I learned to take photographs. I am now learning to be a photographer. So
wow.
there's that transition from doing what you do to being who you are. And I think, that's the work that I do with the business leaders that I work with, is to help them to be the best business person they can be. And it is about identity rather than about knowledge and skill and experience, if that makes any sense at all. But to me,
Complete
that's
sense.
the journey that we're all on.
That's so lovely. I love that. I love that, going from novice to kind of master. So, what would be the legacy that you would like to leave behind?
Well, I think we're in a transition in the world that is as profound as the transition from a kind of hunter gatherer to an agricultural base, or from an agricultural base to an industrial base. I think we're in another transition like the Industrial Revolution, and we're at the very, very beginning of it. So it's very hard for us to see, just as the first industrialists who kind of, James Watt, for example, with his steam engine, he had no concept of where
Mm,
that steam engine would lead. and to us all having cars on our drive that we can go anywhere, with personal transport was never conceived at the time that work was being done. And I think we're in a similar transition that's going to take people from a world in which they work predominantly in large organizations for other people doing a particular role within that organization to a much more portfolio kind of self-employed almost career where the organizations are kind of formed on a project basis rather than on an institutional basis, and that
Mm,
we will gather people together to achieve something, and then those people will disperse and go and gather in other groups to achieve other things. Um, and I think we've seen that start with the transition from, back my father's day, he would a career was with one company, and you had a job for life, uh, in the predominant sense. To my time has been a career of different jobs, but still mostly with organisations until I set up on my own. But I think looking forward, that's going to become rare. Just as it's, there are still people who work in agriculture in the world and farm, but they're a small proportion of the population. And I think we'll look back at factories will be automated in large order, take far fewer people to make the goods and things that we need. And people will be working together on much more, collective endeavour, for want of a better description. And I think the legacy I'd like to leave behind is to encourage and help people to feel that that is a route they can follow, and to give them the tools and the information and the knowledge and the skill and the experience to master that as a way of uh, having a life and building a life with the people that they love and care about. And it's leading to a very different world. And I don't know what that world looks like. Just like James Watt didn't know where his
mm.
steam engine would take things. I don't know where this will take us, but I know that's the journey we're on.
That's wonderful. I love that. I mean, it's much more. They talk about the gig economy, don't they? And kind of gig
Mm,
workers, which is much more kind of transient. Yeah, and it's interesting. Is I mean, my father spent virtually all of his life working life as a in the navy, but that doesn't, as you say, that doesn't sort of exist anymore. And it's going to be a lot harder, or maybe much easier in some ways to kind of drift between different kind of careers and different things, I suppose.
Well, I mean, I think it really boils down to being able to recognize. This is why the identity piece that I talked about,
Mm,
that the difference between being able to take a good photograph and being a photographer.
mm,
I think that understanding who we are, what our identity really is, and what our skills are, and what we bring uniquely to the world, as we all do,
mm,
that is what makes us uh, incredibly powerful in our own very narrow niche. And you think about the way the internet has allowed us to go and find the perfect person for a task actually quite easily,
mm,
anywhere in the world. We don't need to be looking just. I live just outside a town called Chepstow on the Welsh borders. If I was looking for people to work in my business, I 30 years ago, they would have had to have probably been in walking distance of the office,
mm,
or at least cycling distance, because not everybody had cars, and the
mm.
transport system wasn't that great. So, but now, well, they could be anywhere in the world. Literally, they could be
Yeah.
anywhere in the world. And I've worked with VAs in Egypt. I've had suppliers who are in the Far East and in Australia doing stuff for me. I've had graphic designers in New Zealand do stuff for me. I go and find the right person to deliver the service or the product that I need, rather than who's available.
Yeah, brilliant.
And that changes the way we need to think about ourselves and how we market ourselves for what we do as well. Because there's a whole world out there who could look for the support and help that I give to businesses, and I'd be, very happy to work with any of them where my skill is the one that they need right now. And
Mm.
that's the challenge, isn't it? To get the right information to the right people in the right way for them to see that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I really like that. So, if you were to use one word to describe yourself, what would that be?
Hmm. One word's really tough. One word's really tough. Um, I'm going to cheat, right?
You're going to use a hyphen, aren't you?
I'm just gonna use 2 words: optimistic pragmatist.
Okay.
Can I get away with that?
Yeah, written it down. Brilliant. Love it. Really lovely, William. You know, we spoke last week, didn't we, for quite some time, and again today. I find you fascinating. I love your insight, and I like your take on the world. I find it incredibly inspiring. I really do. Um, and it's what I love is that there's a lot of knowledge behind what you're saying, but actually you deliver it in a really simple way, which is really lovely.
Oh well, Sid, you're very kind. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that.
And it's been wonderful talking to you. And thank you very much for your time. And yeah, just thank you.
It,
Really, thank you.
it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Bye.